Today marks Armed Forces Day for South Africa. Every year on the 21st of February, it's a day that really commemorates the sinking of the SS Mendi back in 1917, but it also honors those who have served in uniform. Beyond the parades, the flypasts, what does Armed Forces Day mean in 2026? And so we're going to reflect on the strength, the strain, the strategic direction of the South African National Defence Force and what it truly says and signals about South Africa's defence posture. Joining us for this chat, Professor Thulasizwe Simpson, Associate Professor for Historical and Heritage Studies at the University of Pretoria. Prof. Thulasizwe, a very good morning. Thank you for joining us at this hour. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
All right, let's get into why the moment is so central for South Africa's military identity, perhaps also as we look at this history into a democratic year of South Africa.
Well, the Mendi disaster represents, to the present, the single largest loss of military life of black soldiers in South African history. So it was a day which was commemorated as Mendi Day for many years after 1917. With the second half of the 20th century, with events like Sharpeville and Soweto, other dates have superseded that in terms of commemoration. But with the Armed Forces Day, the Mendi disaster is being remembered, and it's being remembered as being foundational for the creation of South Africa's new armed forces. And the creation of the South African National Defence Force was a consequence of the negotiated transition of the early 90s. The ANC made a suggestion in September 93 for the creation of a joint military force, and discussions were initiated from September that year, where a transitional government was established to lead the country to the 94 elections. And the result of that has been the South African National Defence Force, which we know today from the old South African Defence Force in Sizwe, APLA, which is the PAC's military wing, and some of the homeland armies of the old Bantustans.
Thank you for setting that context, Prof, because beyond our own borders, we obviously also participate in various other missions, both on the continent and the globe as well. And so when we know how SANDF was considered as one of the most strategic and strongest forces on the continent, can you tell us about its evolution over the past 3 decades? Also including the fact that we're seeing resources constraints and some of the other challenges over the years.
With regards to its evolution, thankfully, it's a blessing that we have been able in South Africa to enjoy a peace dividend after 1994, which means that we're not engaged in the kind of internecine conflict which marked the last days of the South African Defence Force. The commitments that the SANDF has been involved in have been peacekeeping abroad. There's a number of functions which people will often not acknowledge, which is maintaining South Africa's marine sovereignty. So that's why a large reason of why we need the Navy to protect against pirates. But also since May 2008 with the xenophobic riots, the army has increasingly been used for internal security, which is an indication of where the major strains on the democratic South African state have rested. In other words, it's not the threat of invasion from neighboring countries, which will require our army to close with and destroy them through firepower and maneuver. It has increasingly been preventing against insidious economic encroachments on our frontiers and also preserving internal stability and security, with the latter and the growing prominence of the latter being an increasing concern and worry.
Well, Prof. Thulasizwe, if we even then come back to South Africa's borders and following the State of the Nation address, we saw that the President announced that there's going to be the deployment of SANDF to assist the police in combating crime and also curbing against or stabilizing hotspots. And so in lieu of this, talk to us a little bit more about what this measure means. It's this temporary measure when it comes to the gaps in policing, but also the constitutional limits of their mandate, what's also set to unfold, that what this also means for law and order at large.
Well, that should be a much more prominent discussion. I mean, it's increasingly become a reflex that when there is an emergency within the country, whether it's gangs or a public health pandemic, to send in the army with the idea that these are men with authority and coercive authority to be able to restore order. But we are a country of laws and equality before the law. We do need specially trained units to make sure that civil rights are maintained and protected. And the military are not ideally or in their regular functions trained and prepared and authorized to do that. And we do need a much stronger and much more prominent discussion about the protection of the rights of civilians under these circumstances. Remember that we are also coming to an anniversary of the death of Collins Khoza during the lockdown, which shows how things could go wrong. And we do need to seriously consider this, and we need to consider getting specialized units, and the police is basically the specialized unit for internal peace and stability, and we need to improve the capability there rather than rely on the reflex of sending in the military, because they are not supposed to be in civilian facing roles to the extent to which they become habituated to doing that will affect their readiness and their capacity to do their functioning role, which is supposed to be defend our army against foreign threats and to destroy foreign enemies through firepower and maneuver.
And Prof, it actually brings me to my next point, because you're speaking about sovereignty, but in this globalized world, I mean, sovereignty is obviously extended beyond our physical borders. And so there's the use of economic, there's cyber threats as well. So when we look at the mandate, the role, the evolution as well, can you speak to a little bit more about what sovereignty means on that front, navigating beyond 2026?
I think the smartest way of exercising sovereignty is to share it with like-minded partners, which enables you to have economies of scale over a large area. For example, the Treasury is speaking that some of the needs of the South African National Defence Force can't be met from the budget. If we were to cooperate with neighbouring countries, for example, making sure that we don't have to defend our borders against countries who've never threatened us militarily, that we can cooperate on customs enforcement, that would enable us to create and move towards things like the Africa Free Trade Zone. We would be more effective with that cooperation if we could gauge what is coming in at ports like Maputo and Beira, at the same time as reducing the overall cost of defense. So we need smart cooperation in this modern world, because especially in Africa, these territorial boundaries are increasingly arbitrary. Incidentally, they would have been to the colonial authorities too. It should be a source of shame and regret for post-colonial Africa that there was much more unity and integration under the colonial states over large areas. It was simply British Africa, and you could move, travel, and invest much more freely than you do at present. So we need to think about whether the territorial dispensation, which has been granted to us as a result of the end of empire and colonialism, is one that works for us in terms of security, prosperity, and all of the goods that we want for our people. And if the answer is no, and I think that the answer is quite clearly, the receipts are in on what it gives us compared to the potential benefits that we could get, that we need to consider smarter ways of sharing sovereignty.
Well, Prof, you're speaking about why it's important for South Africa to have a capable defence force. And so as we leave that conversation there, the commemorations continue. The President obviously going to be laying a wreath in Tuyanda, Limpopo today, and we'll continue with those commemorations as the day progresses. Professor Thulasizwe Simpson this morning, he's an Associate Professor for Historical and Heritage Studies at the University of Pretoria, weighing in, of course, on Armed Forces Day, looking at all the lives that were perished in 1917. But also where to from here and its relevance for 2026 and beyond.